Good evening, you're watching America Today. Subscribe our channel if you are new. Tonight, the nation is witnessing one of the most sweeping and controversial crackdowns on immigration in recent history, as federal authorities escalate enforcement operations across multiple states. From Chicago to Boston to Los Angeles, the debate over immigration enforcement, civil rights, and public safety is once again front and center, fueled by bold federal actions, court rulings, and the growing anger of local communities caught in the crossfire. We begin in Chicago, where a massive immigration operation known as Operation Midway Blitz has been launched by the Trump administration. More than 200 immigration and customs enforcement agents, backed by a fleet of over 100 vehicles, are carrying out raids across the city and surrounding suburbs. Staging their efforts from Naval Station Great Lakes, the nation's largest naval training base located just north of Chicago, these agents are targeting what officials describe as undocumented immigrants with criminal records. Yet the scale of the mobilization and the secrecy surrounding it have shocked residents and local leaders alike. Neither Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker nor Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson was notified of the operation in advance. Both leaders condemned the raids as reckless and politically motivated, accusing the federal government of sowing fear in immigrant neighborhoods. Mayor Johnson called it an unconstitutional overreach, while Governor Pritzker said the mobilization was designed to create chaos and terror. Community groups are reporting widespread panic. Schools half empty as parents kept children home, workplaces disrupted, and immigrant families avoiding even basic errands out of fear of arrest. Community organizers have rushed to distribute Know Your Rights guides in Spanish, Polish, Arabic, and other languages spoken in Chicago, reminding residents that they are not required to open doors to ICE agents without a judicial warrant. The impact has been immediate and deeply felt. At Benito Juarez High School in Pilsen, nearly one-third of students were absent this week, as parents feared dropping them off would expose their families to enforcement. At a popular grocery store in Little Village, customers vanished overnight, leaving aisles deserted. Teachers and social workers across the city described children breaking down in tears, terrified their parents will not be home when they return from school. It is a chilling reminder of how immigration enforcement actions ripple through entire communities, not just the individuals directly targeted. At the same time, ICE insists that Operation Midway Blitz is necessary to restore law and order. Officials claim they are targeting the most dangerous offenders, pointing to statistics that roughly 40% of those apprehended in similar operations had prior felony convictions. But critics argue that the numbers tell another story. In previous large-scale operations, including raids in Mississippi and North Carolina, as many as half of those arrested had no criminal record at all, raising fears that collateral arrests will once again sweep up hard-working families with no history of violence. While Chicago reels, another front has opened on the West Coast. In Los Angeles, the Supreme Court has delivered a ruling that dramatically expands the authority of ICE. Just days ago, the court lifted long-standing restrictions on immigration raids, effectively allowing ICE agents in California to rely on race, language, or appearance as part of their enforcement criteria. Civil rights advocates call this the green light for racial profiling. For decades, such tactics had been curtailed after lawsuits demonstrated that Latino residents, many of them U.S. citizens, were disproportionately stopped and questioned under similar practices. Now, with a 6-3 decision, the court's conservative majority has overturned those limits, ruling that federal immigration enforcement falls under broad executive authority and is not bound by the same constraints as local policing. The ruling has ignited protests across Los Angeles and beyond. Thousands gathered in MacArthur Park, holding signs that read, "No human is illegal," and "Stop racial profiling." City officials, including Mayor Karen Bass, condemned the decision, warning that it will erode trust between immigrant communities and law enforcement, making cities less safe overall. The American Civil Liberties Union has vowed to continue fighting the ruling through new legal challenges, while immigrant rights groups are already documenting cases of what they describe as profiling abuses. Reports have surfaced of Latino men being questioned on buses and trains with no explanation beyond their appearance and accent. For ICE, the ruling is a victory. The agency argues that immigration status cannot be easily separated from language and cultural identity, and that officers must have discretion in identifying potential violators. Supporters of the decision, including members of the Trump administration, say the ruling restores common sense and strengthens national security at a time when the southern border continues to see record crossings. They argue that critics are exaggerating and that ICE remains committed to lawful enforcement focused on dangerous offenders. But the optics are undeniable. Communities of color, particularly Latinos, fear they are being painted with a broad brush, guilty until proven otherwise. Meanwhile, on the East Coast, yet another enforcement surge is underway. In Massachusetts, the Department of Homeland Security has launched what it calls Operation Patriot 2.0, a follow-up to a similar crackdown earlier this year. This new phase is focused on the Boston area and aims to arrest what DHS describes as the worst of the worst criminal illegal aliens. Officials say they are targeting violent offenders, including those with records for assault, weapons charges, and drug trafficking. Back in May, the original Operation Patriot resulted in more than 1,500 arrests across the Northeast. But investigations later revealed that hundreds of those detained had no serious criminal history, and some had no record at all beyond immigration violations. That revelation sparked outrage among immigrant advocates, who accused DHS of misleading the public about its priorities. Now, with Operation Patriot 2.0, the government insists it has refined its targeting to focus strictly on individuals with serious convictions. Still, early reports indicate that families are once again being separated, workplaces disrupted, and entire neighborhoods living under a cloud of fear. In Boston's Chelsea neighborhood, where nearly half the population is foreign-born, church groups have opened their doors to families seeking shelter from potential raids. Local schools have reported significant drops in attendance, echoing the pattern seen in Chicago. And state leaders, including Massachusetts Governor Maura Healey, have criticized the federal government for bypassing local coordination. Healey warned that heavy-handed tactics undermine community safety by driving immigrant residents underground, making them afraid to report crimes or cooperate with police. Taken together, these three developments, Operation Midway Blitz in Chicago, the Supreme Court's ruling in Los Angeles, and Operation Patriot 2.0 in Boston, mark a dramatic escalation in federal immigration enforcement. For supporters, it is long overdue. They argue that the United States has lost control of its borders and that sanctuary policies in cities like Chicago, Los Angeles, and Boston only embolden lawbreakers. They point to rising numbers of border crossings, with Customs and Border Protection reporting nearly 2 million encounters in the past year alone. They cite cases where undocumented immigrants committed violent crimes after being released under local bail reform policies. To them, the federal government is finally stepping in to do what local leaders refuse to: enforce the law. For critics, however, the picture is far darker. They see a government weaponizing immigration enforcement for political gain, targeting communities of color, and sowing fear in schools and workplaces. They highlight stories of U.S. citizens caught up in raids because they looked foreign, of children too scared to attend class, of families torn apart despite years of hard work and community contributions. They argue that these raids erode constitutional protections, undermine trust in law enforcement, and distract from real public safety needs. The data is complex. According to ICE's own statistics, nearly 3/4 of individuals arrested in nationwide operations last year did have criminal records, but the majority were for nonviolent offenses such as immigration violations or low-level drug possession. Only about 20% had violent felony convictions. Civil rights groups argue that this shows the rhetoric about targeting, the worst of the worst, often does not match reality. Meanwhile, ICE insists that even nonviolent offenders undermine the rule of law and that any undocumented presence is a violation that must be addressed. Politically, the moves come at a pivotal moment. President Trump has made immigration enforcement a centerpiece of his administration, promising voters a crackdown on sanctuary cities and a restoration of law and order. Attorney General Pam Bondi, speaking recently on Fox News, emphasized that these operations send a message: the era of leniency is over. For Democrats, the raids are a rallying cry of a different kind, highlighting what they call cruelty, overreach, and the criminalization of immigrant families. With the 2026 midterms already in sight, both sides are using the events of this week to galvanize their bases. On the ground, however, politics feel far removed from the daily realities of those living through these raids. In Chicago, mothers whisper instructions to their children: never open the door, never answer questions, memorize the number of a lawyer. In Los Angeles, workers avoid the subway, fearing they'll be stopped simply for speaking Spanish. In Boston, small businesses that rely on immigrant labor wonder how they'll keep the doors open if employees vanish overnight. The fear is not abstract. It is immediate, it is palpable, and it is reshaping communities across the nation. As the operations continue, the nation is left grappling with difficult questions. Can immigration enforcement be carried out in a way that truly targets dangerous criminals without terrorizing entire neighborhoods? Does expanding federal authority at the expense of local governments make the country safer, or does it erode the very principles of democracy and accountability? And what does it mean for America's identity as a nation built on immigration, when the images on our screens show families hiding in fear, schools half empty, and communities under siege? Tonight, one thing is clear: immigration enforcement is no longer just a border issue. It is in our cities, in our classrooms, on our trains and buses, in the very neighborhoods where millions of Americans live and work every day. Whether you see this as justice finally being served or as injustice unfolding in real time, the stakes could not be higher. We will continue to follow Operation Midway Blitz in Chicago, the fallout of the Supreme Court decision in Los Angeles, and Operation Patriot 2.0 in Boston, bringing you the latest updates as this unprecedented wave of enforcement reshapes the landscape of American life. Subscribe our channel and stay with us.